Hey, so in this video, I want to address how much discretion should you give a trustee when you're setting up a trust for the benefit of a potential beneficiary. I'm Paul Rabelais. I'm an estate planning attorney. This issue comes up often, and probably in many cases, not enough thought goes into some of the decisions that need to be made. So let me give you a little background. Trusts are set up for a million different reasons. But let me get into a couple of the reasons why that might affect some of the discussions we'll be having here on the video. Sometimes a grandparent, for example, may want to leave an inheritance to a grandchild, but doesn't want that grandchild to get the money in a lump sum because they want to make sure the grandchild's productive instead of just getting a bunch of money dumped into their lap. Some people want to kind of have some kind of control from the grave over how an inheritance may be used. Some people may want to dictate, when someone that you're leaving assets to, when they should get those distributions. So a whole bunch of different reasons for trusts. And to best illustrate, let's take an example. Let's take an example of the grandparent. And the grandparent is getting his legal affairs in order. And the grandparent wants to leave something for his grandchild or grandchildren. Let's just say one grandchild to make it simple. But at the time that the grandparent is putting his legal program in place, the grandchild is 6 years old. And let's just say the grandparent wants to leave, I'll pull a number out of thin air, $150,000 to that grandchild. Or maybe it's a percentage of the estate, or maybe it's some other number or some asset. It doesn't really matter. So you really can't leave assets to a minor like that. So in virtually every case, when a grandparent wants to set that up, the smart thing to do is for the grandparent to leave it either through their will in what's called a testamentary trust or through the grandparent's living trust, where assets get transferred to the trust during the grandparent's lifetime. Through one of those mechanisms, an arrangement is made so that when the grandparent dies, $150,000 will be in a trust for the grandchild. Now, some of the decisions that the grandparent has to make are, when can that grandchild have the money? What can it be used for? Who's going to be the trustee of that trust to oversee those distributions? And one of the important discussion points when you're setting up a trust for others is how much discretion do you want to give your trustee? Really, there's option A and option B, and there's a whole bunch of options in between. But let's just identify what those options are. Option A is to give that trustee, maybe total discretion or significant discretion. Maybe that trust is arranged so that grandparents trust. Grandparent hires a lawyer, and we prepare the trust. Maybe that grandparent is comfortable giving the trustee discretion. And let's just say, for example, grandparent's child, maybe or maybe not the parent of the beneficiary, the parent of the grandchild, will be the trustee of that trust when the grandparent dies. And maybe in that trust it says, I leave $150,000 to my grandchild. In trust, I name my child as the trustee. And it may go on to state that I give the trustee the discretion to make distributions to or for the grandchild for the grandchild's health, education, maintenance, and support. Those are common standards, often called the HEMS, H-E-M-S standard. And so that's the option of giving the trustee significant discretion. 20 years later, grandparent has long since died. Assets are in trust for the grandchild, and child/trustee, who perhaps understands what the grandparent's intentions or wishes were, can exercise that discretion to make those distributions to or for the grandchild for his or her health, education, maintenance, and support. Now, that works really well when you have a really solid or strong trustee, a trustee who has the ability to say no when that beneficiary comes to the trustee and says, hey, trustee, you have the ability to exercise your discretion to give me money, give me money. And if the trustee feels like that would not be appropriate, that trust would say, nope, you're right, I do have discretion, and I'm not exercising that discretion because you haven't shown the maturity or responsibility necessary to be rewarded with a distribution from the trust. So again, works well because when the grandparent was setting up the trust, he could not envision what circumstances would be like many years later. And so he's giving that trustee the discretion to exercise, the ability to exercise that discretion in a manner that the trustee determines is in the best interest of the beneficiary. So that's the option A, trustee kind of total discretion, even so insofar as the trustee may have that discretion as to when to terminate the trust, and perhaps just transfer the assets from the trust to the beneficiary. Now, on the other hand, you have option B, which is really where you give the trustee zero discretion. And maybe you set up a trust that says something like, I leave, when I pass away, I leave $150,000 in trust to my grandchild. I name my child as the trustee, and I direct my trustee to distribute $1,500 a month to that grandchild until the trust assets run out. Or maybe you get more restrictive than that because you really want to control things. Maybe you say after grandparent says, after I pass away, I leave $150,000 in trust for my grandchild, and those trust assets can be used to pay for my grandchild's education. If they're at an accredited 4-year college, they maintain a 3.0 grade point average, they haven't committed a felony, and they haven't tested positive for drugs. We see some of that stuff when people really want to control what the money can and can't be used for, and for one reason or another, they don't want to give that trustee the ability to exercise discretion. So there's some risk when you do that, because by completely controlling and putting those very particular restrictions on when distributions can be made, maybe the circumstances 15 or 20 years after you set this up may be so far removed from what you were trying to accomplish that just the whole thing falls apart, and your wishes of trying to do something good for your grandchild can't be honored because you were so restrictive at the time that you prepared the trust. So maybe they met all of those restrictions, but they were still a horrible person. And so you're having to, dole money out to them. And then, you try to define in the trust what's a horrible person. We don't want, and then it's the next restriction and the next restriction. And so, however, when you set it up where the trustee has little or no discretion, you might keep a beneficiary from continuing to badger a trustee to exercise discretion. The beneficiary won't badger the trustee if the trustee can't exercise discretion, and the trustee is just following the letter of the trust and making distribution. So kind of in summary here, you can give a trustee lots of discretion. That's best when I think you have a solid trustee and you're confident that that trustee will exercise their discretion in a manner that's consistent with your overall wishes. And the trustee, when you give the trustee discretion, they can often adapt to future changing circumstances that may not have been able to have been contemplated when you set up that trust. Or you can give the trustee no discretion and impose those specific restrictions on when distributions can be made to or for the benefit of a beneficiary. And when you set it up where the trustee doesn't have a discretion, you're not likely to get a scenario where a beneficiary is going to bother a trustee because it won't do any good, because there's no discretion for the trustee to exercise to make distributions to or for a beneficiary. Hope that helps on this analysis of, do you give a trustee discretion or do you not give a trustee discretion? It's an important part of setting up many different kinds of trusts. I'm Paul Rabelais. Hope this helps. Y'all have a great day. You've earned it, now protect it. See ya.